Hey everybody, welcome back to Data and Discourse, TPhil 251 at UW-Tacoma. Just when you thought you were done with me, here I am back with the same shirt with one more video. We have to cover just a little more material from our Week 1, Unit 2, and I realize it's the start of Week 2 already. That's coming already. I've already posted the modules for that, don't worry. But we didn't. We summarized the chapters pretty well already, and I gave another one of these examples, a new example with this coronavirus death toll example. I'm going to put that right up here. We have to talk about assignment 1 this week. That's coming up. Do not worry. I'm going to have office hours as well on Tuesday, so that'll be a chance to chat about the assignment if you have questions or just want to stop by and say hi. Anyway, we have these articles right here to discuss briefly. There's 4 of them. Let's just see if we can pop each one open in its own window. Now, some of these, I usually try to select articles that are relevant to the topics being discussed, since the first couple chapters here that we've been assigned as our textbook kind of reading are very general and big picture. The readings are pretty general and big picture as well. The idea here is to give you a taste of the kinds of problems we'd like to solve with data, with statistical analysis, and also some of the challenges to using statistics to solve problems, as well as some of the ethical considerations around the modern era of big data. And these articles aren't that current, but they're current enough. This one's a really interesting one from Mark Bellemar. He and a colleague have done some fairly extensive economic research, and what they found is that the states that have a larger proportion of farmers markets, that is more farmers markets per 100,000 people, also have more cases of food-borne illness outbreaks per 100,000 people. That might seem counterintuitive because most people who shop at farmers markets will tell you that they go there because the food is more organic and healthier and closer to nature and less mass produced and also less dangerous. I believe most people who shop at farmers markets would tell you that. So the question they raise is, how can this be? How can it be that states with more farmers markets are also states with more foodborne illness? And the article doesn't resolve that issue. It doesn't answer the question that is posed. It just starts with that observation and then talks about why it's so difficult to figure that out. There's some problems with the data, and this is relevant to some of what we were already talking about with the best chapter 1 reading. And there's just also big problems about how much we can learn from the data that is germane to our discussion from Whelan chapter 1. So you can read the article, and I want you to read the article, so this is not meant to be a substitution for that. It's meant to be an introduction to that article if you haven't read it already, or a summary of the article if you have read the article already. But basically, the correlation is too common and too robust to ignore. We'll talk a lot later on in the quarter about how correlation does not equal causation, and there are such things as spurious correlations, or what we sometimes call accidental correlations. But here they believe there really is something going on, but they can't quite figure out what. And the short answer to why they can't figure it all out has to do with the quality of the data they are using. So, for example, not every case of foodborne illness is recorded by a central agency. So sometimes a doctor sees a case of foodborne illness and might not report that to the central state health authority. So maybe there's some states that are better about reporting foodborne illness and recording it than others. Another possible problem that we have with the data might be that not every case of foodborne illness that a doctor treats is reported to a central place. So even if it's not reported, it might be reported and not recorded. It might not even be reported. And then finally, not everyone who has a foodborne illness is diagnosed as having a foodborne illness. Some people self-treat, some people just isolate and get better on their own. And so we don't know if there's some differences in what's going on there as well. But what they also don't know is they don't know what might be causing people who shop at farmers markets. Let's suppose that the farmers markets really are causing more foodborne illness. They don't have the best possible explanation for it. They have some guesses that might make sense. one of the guesses that they make that does tell a reasonable story is that because farmers markets are seen as healthier and more wholesome and less chemical oriented, less more organic, maybe people don't wash their fruits and vegetables from farmers markets as much as they do if they buy them at the store. That's an interesting way to think about this, which is that the people who assume farmers markets are safe might be endangering themselves by not washing their produce as well as if they had bought it at a store which they assumed was dirty. Anyway, the article raises questions that don't have direct answers right now. That is at the heart of what a lot of data-driven research is around, is trying to figure out what further questions to ask to actually resolve the problem. I thought that was a really good example of that. Next up, I've got big data could solve the college dropout problem. This is a perspective article by Susan, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Svrluga. And she's a reporter. And then we've got this piece, Mark Hampton. I'm not sure who wrote it. Like maybe it's both of them together. I don't know. Maybe she reported it, but it was mostly his position. At any rate, the author or authors here are basically arguing in a perspective piece. So they're giving an opinion piece, and I don't think they're calling it too opinionated because it's not supposed to be controversial. But they're saying that we have access to an abundance of data for college students, and they said we have this problem of students just dropping out of college and never coming back, and if we could identify those who were at risk of dropping out before they dropped out and intervene, maybe we could solve that and we could help people improve their lives. So it's a very positively framed, very idealistic but optimistic view of how we can use data to track students and improve their lives. The sorts of things they recommend, though, are things like referring students who, for example, a student who goes to the gym and then stops going, right? And then you get a text message or an email checking in to make sure everything's okay. Now, first of all, I hope some of you have the problem that I do of your alarm bells going off. And I'm sorry, I just realized that I'm blocking the screen here, which is okay. On the last, I wasn't reading off the screen, I was just sharing the article with you here, but then I was scrolling down and highlighting a piece and suddenly couldn't see it. Anyway, there's our title. I'll get out of the way. Let me make my head small and be that. There we go. Anyway, so some of the examples they give are things like, well, if a student stops going to the gym and they were a regular at the gym, and the student gets in with their ID card, right? So you have an idea about where they are. Or maybe you track them with their cell phone if they have a college-based app on there, or if they have the Wi-Fi password on their cell phone, then you know when they're on campus, right? Like they entered their credentials when their phone entered the credentials for them when they come onto campus and they log into Wi-Fi. So that kind of data, they're arguing, could be really useful to solving this college dropout problem because it would allow for early interventions, targeting students who are at risk, getting them the services they need, and we could make everyone's lives better, and that would be great. So that's the rosy picture. Some of you are probably already getting a little bit nervous about this, right? Man, how do I get rid of all these ads? I think if I just scroll down, it'll disappear. There we go. So this is an article that is a little bit more agnostic about whether this is a good idea or not. And in particular, what it points out is that colleges have decided to, so let's check the dates on this here. This is 2019, so just last year. The other one was 2017, a couple years ago, and we've turned into an episode of Black Mirror all of a sudden, it looks like. And so the idea here is that there are apps now that some colleges are adopting that track students, track their attendance, track whether they're tardy or not to class. A lot of athletic teams, the varsity teams at these, the intercollegiate athletic teams at these colleges sometimes are adopting that to track student athletes because they want to identify students who are at risk of not losing their ability to participate in sports is what a lot of the coaches care about. Some of the coaches probably care about academic performance, more generally than that as well. And so these ideas that we can track students to help them have also been turned into something that feels to a lot of students like a punitive measure, where it's watching you, and if you're not there, you lose points, or it's watching you, and if you're not there, then you get a call from the coach. So there's a lot of examples here about people who feel like it is a Orwellian surveillance state, and that it's fundamentally violating their freedoms to enjoy their life, at college and officially away from home for the first time for a lot of them too. So this idea that here's a quote for you. It embodies a very cynical view of education. It's something we need to enforce on students, right? So the argument here is that it's actually way more complicated than just trying to help students, and that it might in fact be quite creepy. And there's big ethical questions around this about what right do I have to my personal data, even if it's a private school and I officially opt into that. If I sign the user agreement when I enroll in college, is that ethical? Is that okay for someone to keep tabs on me and track every motion that I make and look at how often I'm meeting people and the rest? This idea about tracking college students using your cell phones has actually gone even more 2020s now, because the governments around the world are using cell phones to track individual people's movements and measure at least how effective their attempts to isolate people and enforce social distancing rules are. And in some cases, if it's a totalitarian government like in China, they've actually been using it to track individuals and see how well they're complying with stay-at-home orders or self-isolation, self-quarantining measures. That's true in other places too. For example, I've heard it's been being used in South Korea and Singapore to track individual people who have been in contact and are supposed to be self-quarantining. We already did the coronavirus death toll. I believe, is that all of our articles? It is, yeah. So I hope those two articles that we just looked at about whether big data is good or bad for college students are a really useful frame. First of all, you're all college students. Second of all, everyone has a cell phone. And third, this is a really big social issue. We have a big college dropout problem, and being able to address that would really benefit us, but at what cost? And that's where the ethics of this whole big data phenomenon come in. We're going to come back to issues around big data and what we call statistical discrimination later in the quarter when we get into probability and how to use probability, as well as some problems with probability in later chapters. So that's all for now. I'll leave it there, and I'm going to post some more about week 2 coming up right away.